The day my husband was buried, I thought I'd known true grief. I was wrong. The real heartbreak came a week later, at his will Reading, when my daughter-in-law, Maisie, spat out, "Just get out of our lives and keep that old ranch." What I found in that ranch's basement changed everything, making my phone ring 62 times in a single day. Greed, you see, cost her everything. I still remember the oppressive silence of that law office, heavy with the scent of old leather and fresh betrayal. My black dress, the same one from Levi's funeral 3 days prior, felt like a shroud. I sat there, numb, while my son, Quinn, fidgeted, avoiding my gaze. Across from him, Maisie, his wife, dramatically examined her perfectly manicured nails, already bored with the proceedings. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, cleared his throat, his voice a monotone drone as he began reading Levi's last wishes. To my beloved wife, Mildred, I leave the ranch property on Willow Creek Road. Maisie's exaggerated sigh cut through the room like a knife. "Oh, for crying out loud," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Just get rid of that old dump and come live with us. You can help with the kids and actually be useful for once." My chest tightened, a familiar pain. Quinn said nothing, just stared at his hands. This was my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd worked double shifts for after his father, Levi, struggled to keep a job. And now, he couldn't even look at me. The lawyer continued, his voice softer now. "The main residence, investment accounts, and remaining assets are to be divided between—" Maisie interrupted again, sitting up straighter. "Now that's more like it. Something worth talking about." They discussed my life, my home of 37 years, the place where I'd raised Quinn, where I'd nursed Levi through his final illness. It was all being carved up, divided between strangers, because that's what Quinn had become to me, a stranger wearing my son's face. When the reading finally ended, Maisie stood, smoothing her designer skirt. "Well, Mildred," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I guess that settles it. Just get out of our lives and go play farmer at that old ranch. Maybe the isolation will give you time to think about all the ways you failed as a mother." The words hit me like a physical blow. Failed as a mother. I'd sacrificed everything for Quinn. My career, my dreams, my very identity. I'd worked nights at the diner, saved every penny for his college fund, celebrated every small victory, and mourned every disappointment as if it were my own. Quinn finally looked up. Then, but instead of defending me, he said quietly, "Maybe it's for the best, Mom. You and Maisie have never really gotten along." Never gotten along? As if this was some petty squabble, not a systematic campaign to erase me from my own family. For years, Maisie had poisoned Quinn against me, finding fault with everything I did. My gifts to the grandchildren were inappropriate. My advice was outdated. The love I offered was suffocating. "I understand," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I gathered my purse, my legs unsteady, and stood. "I'll pack my things." Maisie's smile was triumphant. "Don't forget to take all those old photos and knickknacks. We're redecorating anyway." Old photos and knickknacks. 40 years of memories reduced to clutter in her eyes. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd lost not just my husband, but my entire identity. The woman who'd been Quinn's mother, Levi's wife, the grandmother who'd secretly hoped to be a bigger part of her grandchildren's lives, she was being erased as efficiently as dust wiped from a shelf. The drive to pack my belongings was a blur of tears and disbelief. Quinn didn't offer to help. He didn't even come to see me off. As I pulled away, my old sedan loaded with boxes, I saw Maisie watching from the window, her expression satisfied, like she'd finally gotten rid of a persistent pest. The ranch was 40 miles outside town, down a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. As I bumped along, I wondered if this was how exile always felt, like driving toward the edge of the world, everything familiar disappearing in my rearview mirror. I'd only visited the ranch a handful of times. Levi had inherited it from his grandfather, but never seemed interested in it. Too much work, he'd always said when I suggested we fix it up or sell it. Too many memories. I never understood what he meant by that last part. Now, Pulling up to the weathered farmhouse as the sun began to set, I felt the full weight of my new reality. This ramshackle building, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, was home now, not by choice, but by the cruel mathematics of family politics, where love could be divided like property and distributed to the highest bidder. The key was where Levi always kept it, under the loose board on the porch steps. Inside, the house smelled musty and forgotten. Dust motes danced in the fading light streaming through dirty windows. The furniture was covered in white sheets, like ghosts, and every footstep echoed in the emptiness. I sat down heavily in what had once been the living room and finally allowed myself to cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd shed at the funeral, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound loss. I wasn't just mourning Levi anymore. I was mourning the illusion that family meant something more than convenience and inheritance. In that moment, surrounded by shadows and silence, I made a promise to myself. I would survive this. I would find a way to rebuild my life from the ashes of what Maisie and Quinn had left me. I just had no idea that the means to do exactly that was already waiting for me, hidden in the very foundations of the place they'd exiled me to. My phone buzzed once in my purse, a text from an unknown number, probably spam. I ignored it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, I would grieve for the family I'd lost and the woman I used to be. The first week at the ranch nearly broke me. Every morning, I woke expecting to hear Levi's coffee pot gurgling or Quinn calling to complain about some crisis in his perfect suburban life. Instead, I was greeted by silence so complete it felt like the world had forgotten I existed. The only sounds were the settling of old wood and the occasional creak of the windmill outside my bedroom window. I threw myself into cleaning, partly because the house desperately needed it, and partly because keeping busy was the only thing standing between me and complete despair. Room by room, I pulled away dust covers and scrubbed away years of neglect. It was therapeutic in a way, like I was uncovering not just furniture, but pieces of Levi's past I'd never known existed. In the bedroom that had obviously been his as a child, I found a collection of arrowheads, carefully displayed in a glass case. I'd never known Levi was interested in Native American artifacts. In what must have been his grandfather's study, there were shelves lined with geology books and rock samples. Again, this was news to me. In 42 years of marriage, Levi had never mentioned rocks or minerals beyond complaining about the ones in our garden. The kitchen yielded the biggest surprise. Tucked behind a loose board in the pantry, I discovered a metal box containing old letters tied with string. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. They were love letters, but not the kind I expected. These were from someone named Elena, dated from the 1940s, written in Spanish. At the bottom of the box were photographs of a beautiful young woman standing next to a man who looked remarkably like Levi's grandfather. I sat at the kitchen table, studying the photos and trying to piece together this hidden story. Elena's letters spoke of mining rights and land surveys, mixed with passionate declarations of love. She mentioned our secret and the wealth beneath the earth in ways that made my heart race. Had Levi's grandfather been involved in some kind of mining operation? And why had Levi never mentioned any of this? That evening, I called the only person I could think of who might have answers, Ruth Payton, who'd lived in town longer than anyone and remembered Levi's family from the old days. Ruth had always been kind to me, even when other women in town started treating me differently after Maisie arrived and began spreading her poison. "Oh, honey," Ruth said when I explained what I'd found. I was wondering when someone would ask about old Samuel Morrison's mining claims. My heart stopped. Mining claims. Samuel, that was Levi's grandfather. He was always convinced there was copper on that property, maybe silver, too. He spent years filing claims and doing surveys. But then the war came, and he went off to fight. When he came back, he married that Mexican girl, Elena, I think her name was. Caused quite a scandal at the time. Elena, the woman in the photographs, what happened to her? I asked. Ruth's voice grew sad. She died in childbirth. Samuel never really recovered. He kept working the land, convinced he'd strike it rich someday. But he became a hermit. When he died, He left everything to Levi's father. But by then, everyone had forgotten about the mining business. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, my mind spinning. Mining claims, surveys, land that might contain valuable minerals. No wonder Levi had always seemed reluctant to sell the ranch, even when we needed money. But why hadn't he ever told me? Why keep it secret? The next few days, I searched the house more systematically. In Levi's grandfather's desk, I found survey maps dated from the 1940s, marked with notations I couldn't understand. There were correspondence files with the Bureau of Land Management and copies of mineral rights applications. Most intriguingly, there was a folder labeled Assay Reports that contained geological surveys suggesting the presence of copper deposits across the entire property. I was beginning to realize that my exile to this worthless ranch might not be the punishment Maisie intended it to be. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. But it was what I found in the bedroom closet that really changed everything. Hidden behind a false back panel, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was a manila envelope containing updated surveys from the 1970s. These weren't just exploratory reports. They were detailed geological assessments that confirmed substantial mineral deposits beneath the ranch. My hand shook as I read the technical language. Terms like economically viable extraction and estimated reserves jumped out at me. There were notes in Levi's handwriting in the margins, calculations and phone numbers, evidence that he'd been researching this secretly for years. The most shocking document was at the bottom of the pile, a letter from a mining company dated just 6 months before Levi's death, offering to lease the mineral rights for an amount that made my eyes water. Levi had never responded to it. I sat on the bedroom floor, surrounded by papers that painted a picture of wealth beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The ranch that Quinn and Maisie had exiled me from the family with was potentially worth millions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, seeing it with new eyes. The creaking floorboards, the drafty windows, the isolation that had felt like punishment, all of it was sitting on top of a treasure that could change my life completely. But more than the money, I felt something else stirring in my chest. For the first time since Levi's death, since Quinn's betrayal, since Maisie's cruel dismissal, I felt powerful. They thought they'd gotten rid of me, shuffled me off to somewhere I couldn't interfere with their plans. Instead, they'd handed me the keys to a kingdom they didn't even know existed. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with this information, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Mildred Morrison, the discarded mother, the inconvenient widow, was about to disappear forever. In her place, something much more dangerous was taking shape. Someone who finally understood that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people live with the consequences of their own greed and blindness. The transformation had begun, and I was the only one who knew it. The basement had always intimidated me. Every time I'd visited the ranch over the years, Levi had steered me away from those narrow wooden stairs that disappeared into the darkness below the kitchen. Nothing down there but junk and spiders, he'd always said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Not worth bothering with. But after finding the mining documents upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that Levi had been protecting more than just my fear of cobwebs. So, on a gray Thursday morning, armed with a heavy flashlight and more determination than common sense, I finally descended into the basement of the ranch house. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the musty smell of earth and old wood filled my nostrils. The flashlight beam revealed stone foundation walls that looked much older than the house above. Massive blocks fitted together with the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the basement was larger than I'd expected, extending well beyond the footprint of the house. Along one wall stood a workbench covered with tools I didn't recognize, picks, hammers, and strange measuring devices that looked like they belonged in a museum. But it was the far corner that made my breath catch. There, partially hidden behind stacks of wooden crates, was what looked like the entrance to a tunnel. My heart pounded as I approached it. The opening was about 4 feet high, shored up with timber that looked sturdy despite its age. A cool draft flowed from the darkness beyond, carrying a mineral scent that reminded me of the geology samples I'd found upstairs. I wasn't brave enough to venture into that tunnel alone, but I could see enough to know it wasn't natural. Someone had dug this deliberately, and from the professional look of the support beams, they'd known what they were doing. Turning back to explore the rest of the basement, I began examining the wooden crates more carefully. Most were empty, but one in the corner felt different when I tried to move it. Heavier. Inside, wrapped in layers of canvas, I found chunks of rock that definitely didn't belong in someone's casual collection. Even with my limited knowledge, I could see veins of green and blue running through the gray stone. Copper, maybe? The rocks felt substantial in my hands, and when I scratched one with a nail file from my purse, it left a metallic streak that caught the flashlight beam. But the real treasure was in the last crate I opened. At the bottom, beneath more rock samples, I found a leather portfolio tied with string. Inside were documents that made the papers upstairs look like rough drafts. These were official geological surveys completed just 5 years ago by a professional mining company. The letterhead read Morrison Geological Associates. Apparently, Levi had commissioned this work under his grandfather's name to avoid local attention. The technical language was challenging, but the conclusions were crystal clear. The property contained what geologists called a significant copper deposit with excellent commercial potential. There were estimates of ore quality, extraction costs, and projected revenues that made my hands shake as I read them. One document was particularly eye-opening, a feasibility study that outlined how modern mining techniques could extract the copper with minimal environmental impact. The projected revenue over a 20-year lease was astronomical, enough to make someone wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. But the document that changed everything was dated just 3 months before Levi's death. It was a formal offer from Southwestern Mining Corporation to lease the mineral rights for an upfront payment of $2 million, plus quarterly royalties that could total millions more over the life of the lease. Levi had never even told me about it. I sat on an overturned crate, surrounded by evidence of my husband's secret life, and tried to process what this meant. For years, while I'd worried about retirement savings and medical bills, while I'd watched Quinn struggle with his mortgage, and Maisie complain about wanting a bigger house, we'd been sitting on a fortune. More than that, Levi had known about it. He'd commissioned surveys, received formal offers, and kept it all hidden from everyone, including me. Why? What had he been planning? I found part of the answer in the very last document in the portfolio. A handwritten note in Levi's familiar scrawl. It was dated just weeks before his final hospital stay. Mildred deserves better than what I gave her. This is her chance to have the life she sacrificed for Quinn and me. Don't let that woman ruin everything we worked for. That woman. Even in his private notes, Levi couldn't bring himself to write Maisie's name. But his meaning was clear. He'd known exactly what kind of person his daughter-in-law was, and he'd been protecting this discovery from her. The ranch that Quinn and Maisie had dismissed as worthless, that they'd used to exile me from the family, was worth more than everything else in Levi's estate combined. They'd essentially handed me millions of dollars while congratulating themselves on getting rid of me. I climbed the basement stairs, my mind racing, my heart pounding. In the kitchen, I spread the documents across the table and tried to think clearly about what to do next. The smart thing would be to contact Southwestern Mining Corporation immediately, confirm their offer was still valid, and start the process of leasing the mineral rights. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of Maisie's smug smile as she dismissed me from my own family. Maybe it was the way Quinn had sat there silent while his wife humiliated me. Or maybe it was just the realization that, for the first time in my adult life, I held all the cards. I thought about the phone calls I'd been ignoring all week. Quinn had left several voicemails that I'd deleted without listening to. Maisie had sent text messages that I'd blocked. They probably expected me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and a place in their perfect suburban life. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the number on the Southwestern Mining letterhead. A professional woman's voice answered on the second ring. "Miss Morrison, we've been hoping to hear from you. Is this regarding your husband's mineral rights inquiry?" I took a deep breath, feeling power flow through me like electricity. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "I'd like to discuss your proposal." "Wonderful. We're still very interested in the property. In fact, given recent market conditions, we might be able to improve on our original offer. Could we arrange a site visit? As I scheduled the appointment for the following week, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the broken, grieving widow who'd been exiled from her own family. This was someone else entirely. Someone with options. Someone with power. Someone who was about to change the rules of the game completely. I spent the rest of the day researching mining law and royalty agreements online. By evening, I understood exactly what I was sitting on and what it could mean for my future. More importantly, I understood what Quinn and Maisie had given up in their eagerness to be rid of me. That night, I slept better than I had since Levi's funeral. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time since the reading of the will, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of running away from everything I'd lost. My phone in my bedroom buzzed once with another text from Quinn, but I didn't even look at it. Whatever crisis was driving him to reach out could wait. I had more important things to focus on now. Outside my window, the old windmill creaked in the night breeze, but it no longer sounded lonely. It sounded like a promise. The men from Southwestern Mining Corporation arrived on Tuesday morning in a white pickup truck that looked serious and expensive. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this meeting, researching everything I could about mineral rights and mining leases. I'd also driven into town and bought myself a new outfit. Not the practical clothes I'd worn for years while caring for Levi, but a sharp business suit that made me feel like someone worth taking seriously. The team leader, a weathered man named Frank Torres, had the kind of calm competence that comes from decades of experience. His assistant, a younger woman named Sarah Chen, carried a tablet and several pieces of equipment I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Morrison," Frank said, shaking my hand with genuine respect. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a smart man to hold on to this property." We spent the morning walking the boundaries of the ranch. Frank explained what they'd found in their previous surveys, pointing out geological features I'd never noticed, rock formations that indicated mineral deposits, subtle changes in soil color that spoke to what lay beneath. "The copper seam runs diagonally across your property," Sarah explained, showing me a digital map on her tablet. "It's what we call a high-grade deposit, which means the concentration of metal is well above average. That translates to significantly higher royalty payments." When we reached the area above the basement tunnel, Frank stopped and smiled. "Your husband's grandfather was no fool. This tunnel follows the copper vein almost perfectly. He must have had good instincts about geology." "What kind of money are we talking about?" I asked, surprising myself with how businesslike I sounded. Frank and Sarah exchanged a look. "Mrs. Morrison," Frank said carefully, "given current copper prices and what we know about the deposit, we're prepared to offer you $4 million upfront for a 20-year lease, plus quarterly royalties that should average between $300,000 and $500,000. I managed to keep my expression neutral, but inside, I was reeling. $4 million upfront, $500,000 every 3 months. In the first year alone, I'd make more money than Levi and I had earned in our entire marriage combined. "I'll need to review the contract with a lawyer," I said, proud of how steady my voice remained. "Of course," Frank replied. "Take all the time you need. But Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know this is an exceptional property. Your husband could have made this deal years ago and lived very comfortably. I'm curious why he waited." I thought about Levi's handwritten note, about his reference to protecting me from that woman. "I think he was waiting for the right time," I said. That afternoon, after Frank and Sarah left, I sat in the ranch house kitchen, staring at the preliminary contract they'd given me. The numbers seemed almost fictional. But more than the money, I felt something else, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in decades. For 42 years, I'd defined myself by what I could do for other people. I was Quinn's mother, Levi's wife, the grandmother who sent birthday cards and Christmas presents. My own dreams had been set aside so long ago, I'd almost forgotten what they were. Now, suddenly, I had the power to define myself however I wanted. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Quinn's number. For the first time in weeks, I answered. "Mom." His voice sounded strained, uncertain. "I've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," I said simply. There was a pause. "Look, Mom, Maisie thinks maybe we were too harsh at the lawyer's office. She wanted me to call and see how you're settling in. Maisie wanted him to call, not Quinn himself. Even now, he couldn't have a conversation with his own mother without his wife's permission. I'm settling in just fine, I said. Good. That's good. Another pause. The thing is, Mom, we're having some cash flow issues with the house. The property taxes are higher than we expected, and Maisie wants to renovate the kitchen. We were wondering if you might be able to help us out, just temporarily. There it was. They'd barely finished dividing up Levi's estate, and already they needed more money. I thought about the contract sitting on my kitchen table, about the millions of dollars I'd soon have access to. How much? I asked. Well, the taxes are about $12,000, and the kitchen renovation would be around $30,000, so maybe $50,000 total. We'd pay you back as soon as we can refinance. $50,000. 6 months ago, that would have been an impossible sum. Now, it was less than what I'd earn in quarterly royalties from the mining lease. Quinn, I said slowly, are you happy with Maisie? The question clearly caught him off guard. What? Of course, I'm happy. Why would you ask that? Because in 42 years of marriage, your father never once asked me to lie for him, never made me choose between him and my family, and never made me feel ashamed of where I came from. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Quinn said quietly, Mom, what are you trying to say? I'm saying that a good partner makes you better, not smaller. They don't isolate you from the people who love you. Maisie doesn't isolate me. She has high standards. High standards. As if treating his mother with basic human decency was some kind of unreasonable expectation. Quinn, do you remember when you were 8 and you wanted to build that treehouse in the backyard? Mom, what does this have to do with anything? Your father said it was too dangerous, too expensive, too much work. But I saw how much you wanted it, so I worked extra shifts at the diner and bought the lumber myself. We spent 3 weekends building it together. Do you remember that? His voice was softer now. Yeah, I remember. I would have done anything for you, Quinn. I did do anything for you. But I won't be treated like a burden or an embarrassment by anyone, including you. Mom, I never said you were an embarrassment. You didn't have to say it. You sat there and let Maisie say it for you. Another long silence. When Quinn spoke again, his voice was small, like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. What do you want me to do, Mom? She's my wife. I want you to be the man I raised you to be, the one who knows the difference between love and control. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of the ranch house kitchen. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows and making the old house creak. But for the first time since Levi's death, the sounds didn't make me feel lonely. They made me feel grounded. I picked up the mining contract and read through it again. This time, focusing on the timeline. If I signed within the next 2 weeks, the upfront payment will be processed within 30 days. By the end of next month, I'd be financially independent in ways I'd never imagined possible. The question was, what did I want to do with that independence? As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd left the lawyer's office in tears just 3 weeks ago. This woman had options. This woman had power. This woman was just beginning to understand what she was capable of. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Probably spam. But something made me look at it anyway. Mrs. Morrison, this is Janet from Dr. Phillips's office. Your husband's final medical bills are overdue. Please call to arrange payment. I stayed at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Tomorrow, I'd call Dr. Phillips's office and pay off Levi's medical bills in full. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. The difference between those two things was becoming clearer to me every day. And tomorrow, I'd start making choices based on what I wanted, not what other people expected from me. For the first time in my adult life, I was about to discover what that felt like. The contract was signed on a Thursday. I'd driven into the city to meet with an attorney I'd found through the State Bar Association, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells, who specialized in mineral rights law. She'd reviewed every line of the Southwestern mining agreement with a kind of attention to detail that made me grateful I'd waited. "This is an excellent deal, Mrs. Morrison," Patricia had said, sliding the final documents across a mahogany desk. "In 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen terms this favorable for a property owner." When I signed my name at the bottom of the last page, I felt something shift inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock that had been jammed for decades. The woman who'd been dismissed from her own family's future was now worth more than all of them combined. The first payment would arrive within 2 weeks. $4 million, deposited directly into an account I'd opened specifically for this purpose. I'd also arranged for the quarterly royalty payments to go into a separate investment account. Patricia had recommended a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to strike it rich through unexpected inheritance. But the money, as life-changing as it was, wasn't what filled me with satisfaction as I drove back to the ranch. It was the knowledge that Quinn and Maisie had orchestrated their own downfall through sheer greed and cruelty. That satisfaction turned to something stronger when I got home and found 17 missed calls on my phone. The first few voicemails were from Quinn, his voice increasingly desperate. "Mom, please call me back. Something's happened with the house. We really need to talk." Then came Maisie's voice, all traces of a usual condescension replaced by panic. "Mildred, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to call us immediately. This is about family." Family. Now I was family again. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into the kitchen chair before returning Quinn's call. He answered before the first ring finished. "Mom, thank God. Where have you been?" "I've been taking care of business," I said calmly. "What seems to be the problem?" "The problem?" His voice cracked. "Mom, we got a notice from the county. They are saying Dad never properly transferred the mineral rights to the house when he bought it from his grandfather's estate. They are saying those rights might still belong to the ranch property." I took a slow sip of wine, savoring the moment. "Is that so?" "Mom, this is serious. If they are right, it could affect our property value. The bank is asking questions about our loan. We might have to refinance at a much higher rate." Of course, they would. The house that Quinn and Maisie had been so eager to claim was built on a small portion of the original ranch property. When Levi's grandfather divided the land in the 1960s, selling off the lot where the main house now stood, the mineral rights had remained with the ranch. It was a common practice in that era and completely legal. I'd discovered this particular detail while reviewing the mining company's geological surveys. They'd been very thorough in researching the property boundaries and mineral rights ownership. The irony was exquisite. Quinn and Maisie had the house, but I owned everything valuable underneath it. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That's what we're trying to do. But attorneys are expensive, Mom. Really expensive. And with the refinancing issues. How expensive?" The initial consultation alone was $5,000. A full property rights review could cost $30,000 or $40,000. Money we don't have right now. I let the silence stretch out, listening to Quinn's anxious breathing. Finally, I said, "Well, that is a problem. Mom, please. I know things have been difficult between us lately, but we're family. We need to stick together." Family. There was that word again. It was amazing how quickly it reappeared in their vocabulary when they needed something. "Quinn, do you remember what Maisie said to me at the lawyer's office?" "Mom, she was upset. We all were. People say things when they're grieving. She told me to get out of your lives and go play farmer. She said I'd failed as a mother. She said maybe the isolation would give me time to think about my failures. She didn't mean it like that." "How did she mean it, Quinn?" "Because it sounded pretty clear to me." Another pause. "Mom, what do you want? An apology?" "Fine. I'm sorry. Maisie's sorry, too. We all handled Dad's death badly. An apology. As if 40 years of sacrifice and unconditional love could be balanced by a grudging sorry delivered under financial duress. "Quinn, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Okay? I've signed a mining lease for the ranch property. A very lucrative mining lease." Silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "What kind of mining lease?" The kind that's going to make me more money in the next year than your father and I earned in our entire marriage. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Quinn found his voice. How much money, Mom? Enough that I don't need to worry about attorney fees or refinancing or property taxes ever again. Jesus Christ. His voice was hollow. How long have you known about this? I found out after I moved to the ranch, after you and Maisie made it very clear that I wasn't welcome in your new life. Mom, we never said you weren't welcome. You didn't have to say it, Quinn. Actions speak louder than words, and your actions told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in your priorities. I could hear Maisie's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Quinn covered the phone, but I could still make out fragments. Millions? How much? Get her to. When Quinn came back on the line, his voice had changed. It was the tone he used to use when he wanted something as a child. Wheedling, manipulative, calculated to trigger my maternal instincts. Mom, I know we've made mistakes, but we're family. Whatever's happening with this mining thing, we should face it together. Maybe we can work something out that benefits everyone. Benefits everyone. Translation, give us money. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? I asked. Well, if the mineral rights thing affects our property, maybe we could merge the properties back together, pull our resources. We could all live comfortably. All live comfortably after they'd worked so hard to exile me from their comfortable life. Where would I live in this arrangement? I asked. With us, of course. We could build you a nice apartment over the garage. You'd have your privacy, but you'd be close to the grandkids. An apartment over the garage. After I'd just become worth millions of dollars, they were offering me an apartment over the garage. Quinn, I said, my voice deadly calm. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. 3 weeks ago, your wife told me to get out of your lives and rot in isolation at a worthless ranch. Now that you've discovered that ranch is worth a fortune, you want to pool resources and graciously allow me to live over your garage. Is that an accurate summary? Mom, when you put it like that, it sounds exactly like what it is. You want my money, but you still don't want me? That's not true, is it? Tell me, Quinn, in this wonderful arrangement you're proposing, who would control the mining lease? Who would make the financial decisions? Who would determine how the money gets spent? Silence. I thought so. My phone buzzed with another incoming call. Maisie, calling from her own phone. I ignored it. Mom, please don't do anything hasty. Let's sit down and talk about this like adults. I'm being an adult, Quinn. For the first time in 40 years, I'm making decisions based on what's best for me, not what's convenient for other people. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being the person you call when you need money or free babysitting or someone to blame for your problems. I'm done being expendable. You're not expendable, Mom. You're not thinking clearly. Grief can make people do irrational things. Irrational. Now, I was irrational for refusing to bail them out of a crisis of their own making. Quinn, the next time you speak to me, I want it to be because you actually want a relationship with me, not because you want something from me. Until then, I suggest you figure out how to solve your own problems. I hung up before he could respond. Within seconds, my phone was buzzing again. Quinn, then Maisie, then Quinn again. I turned it off and set it aside. Outside, the sun was setting over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow, representatives from the mining company would arrive to begin the preliminary survey work. Soon, this quiet property would be bustling with activity as they prepared to extract the wealth that had been sleeping beneath the earth for millions of years. But tonight, it was just me in the silence and the knowledge that everything had changed. I wasn't the woman who'd been exiled from her own family anymore. I wasn't the convenient source of emergency funds or free labor or guilt-absorbing apologies. I was Mildred Morrison, and I was worth exactly what I said I was worth. Nothing more and definitely nothing less. My phone, even though it was turned off, seemed to pulse with the weight of all those missed calls. 62 attempts to reach me in a single day. Not because they'd suddenly realized they loved me, but because they'd finally realized what they'd thrown away. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my renovated ranch house, watching the sunrise paint the mountains purple and gold, when the mining company's quarterly report arrived. The envelope felt substantial in my hands, thick with official documents and financial statements. Inside, along with the usual technical updates about extraction progress and market prices, was a check that still made my breath catch, even though I'd received 3 of them now. $437,000, my share of the copper sales for the previous quarter. I set the check aside and picked up my coffee, savoring the ritual that had become precious to me. Every morning I sat on this porch and watched the world wake up around me. Some days I saw deer grazing in the distance. Other days I watched the mining crews arrive for their shift, respectful and efficient in their work on the far side of the property. The phone beside me rang once and stopped. Someone leaving a voicemail. I didn't rush to check it anymore. These days, most of my calls were from people I actually wanted to talk to. Patricia Wells, my attorney, keeping me updated on legal matters. Frank Torres from the mining company, providing operational updates. Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd become something of a friend, as well as a professional contact. And sometimes, though less frequently now, from Quinn. The character of his calls had changed over the past 6 months. The desperate pleading had gradually given way to awkward attempts at normal conversation. Last week, he'd called to tell me that his youngest daughter had lost her first tooth. The week before, he'd asked for my pot roast recipe. Small gestures, but they felt different than his previous communication. Less calculated, more genuine. I'd started answering about half of his calls. Maisie, on the other hand, had stopped calling entirely after a particularly unpleasant conversation in February, where she'd accused me of manipulating the situation and turning Quinn against his own family. I'd listened to her rant for about 2 minutes before calmly informing her that I had neither the time nor the inclination to manipulate anyone, and that if Quinn was reconsidering his priorities, perhaps she should examine her own behavior instead of blaming me. She'd hung up on me. It was the last time we'd spoken. From what Quinn told me during our careful conversations, their marriage was struggling. The financial stress of the mineral rights issue had exposed cracks that had probably been there all along. Quinn had been forced to take out a second mortgage at a punitive interest rate. Maisie's grand renovation plans had been shelved indefinitely. Most tellingly, Quinn had started attending family therapy sessions alone since Maisie refused to participate. I'm learning about boundaries, he told me during our last conversation, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I'd said nothing, but the irony wasn't lost on me. Quinn was learning lessons I'd tried to teach him for years, but only after watching his own world crumble under the weight of his wife's demands. The mining operation itself had exceeded everyone's expectations. The copper deposit was not only larger than initially projected, but the ore quality was exceptional. Frank had mentioned that other mining companies were expressing interest in adjacent properties, drawn by the success of our operation. "You're sitting on one of the richest copper strikes in the region," he'd told me last month. "Your husband's grandfather had good instincts." I'd used some of the money to completely renovate the ranch house, but tastefully, preserving its character while adding modern conveniences, solar panels on the roof, a new kitchen with efficient appliances, central heating and air conditioning, high-speed internet that allowed me to manage my investments and stay connected to the world. But more than the physical improvements, I'd invested in experiences. I'd taken a photography class and discovered I had an eye for capturing the beauty of the landscape around me. I'd traveled to Santa Fe and spent a week learning about the Native American culture that had shaped this region's history. I'd even taken a geology course at the community college, wanting to understand the science behind the wealth flowing from my land. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself. The voicemail light was blinking on my phone. I picked it up and played the message. "Hi, Mom." Quinn's voice was softer than it used to be, less demanding. "I wanted to let you know that Emma made the honor roll this semester, and Tommy's soccer team made it to the regional finals. I thought you might want to know." A pause. Then, "I also wanted to say that I've been thinking about what you said about being the man you raised me to be. I'm trying, Mom. It's harder than I thought it would be, but I'm trying." Another pause. Longer this time. "I love you, Mom. I know I haven't said that enough lately, but I do, and I'm sorry for everything." The message ended with a soft click. I sat with the phone in my lap, watching a hawk circle high above the mesa. Quinn's apology wasn't the desperate plea for money that had characterized his early calls. It felt genuine, earned through months of difficult self-examination rather than prompted by immediate financial need. I scrolled through my contacts and called him back. "Mom?" He sounded surprised. "Hopeful. I got your message," I said. "Tell me about Emma's honor roll." For the next 20 minutes, we talked about his children, their achievements and struggles and dreams. Quinn told me about Tommy's soccer skills and Emma's passion for science. He mentioned almost casually that both kids had been asking about their grandmother and wondering when they might see me again. "They miss you," he said simply. "We all do." "I miss them, too," I admitted. "Would you like to bring them for a visit sometime? The ranch is quite comfortable now." "Really? You'd want that, Mom?" "Quinn, I never stopped wanting to be part of their lives. I just wasn't willing to accept being treated as disposable anymore." "I understand," he said, and I could hear that he meant it. "Maisie and I are separated right now. Have been for about a month." I wasn't surprised, but I was careful not to sound pleased. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" "I'm sorry that your marriage didn't work out the way you hoped. I'm not sorry that you're finally putting your own needs and your children's needs first." She said I'd have to choose between her and you. And I told her that anyone who would make me choose between the people I love doesn't understand what love means. I felt something loose in my chest, a knot of tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it completely. "Can I ask you something, Mom?" "Of course. When you found out about the mining thing, about how much money it was worth, did you ever think about sharing it with us? Even after everything that happened?" I considered the question carefully. "Do you want the honest answer?" "Yes." For about 5 minutes, I thought about using the money to solve everyone's problems, pay off your mortgage, set up college funds for the kids, make everything smooth and easy again. "What changed your mind?" "I realized that fixing your problems wouldn't actually help you. It would just enable you to keep making the same mistakes. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they can learn to make better choices." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding. "I'm learning that now," Quinn said finally, the hard way. "But I'm learning." "Good," I said. "That's how the best lessons usually come." We talked for a few more minutes about practical things. When he might visit with the children, whether he needed help finding a family therapist who specialized in divorce mediation, how he was managing as a single father. After we hung up, I sat on my porch and watched the sun climb higher into the cloudless sky. The mining equipment hummed in the distance, a steady reminder of the wealth flowing from the earth beneath my feet. But the real treasure wasn't in the quarterly checks or the renovated house or the financial security I'd never imagined possible. The real treasure was in reclaiming my own worth, in learning that love without respect was just manipulation, in discovering that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to face their own consequences and grow from them. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah Chen, my friend at the mining company, sending photos from a conference where she presented our site as a case study in successful small-scale copper extraction. "Your property is famous in geology circles now," she'd written. "The woman who struck gold at 69. I smiled and texted back, "Copper. Not gold, but close enough." As I prepared to go inside and start my day, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me was still 69 years old, still a widow, still learning to navigate a world that often dismissed people like her. But she was also a woman who discovered that it's never too late to reclaim your power. Never too late to set boundaries that protect your dignity. Never too late to learn that your worth isn't determined by how useful you are to other people, but by how true you are to yourself. The phone rang again. This time it was Frank Torres with an update on next quarter's projections. As I listened to him explain the latest market trends and extraction rates, I found myself thinking about Levi and his grandfather, and all the generations of Morrison women who'd made sacrifices and compromises and settled for less than they deserved. That cycle ended with me. I was no longer someone's convenient fallback plan or emergency fund or repository for guilt and disappointment. I was Mildred Morrison, owner of one of the most productive copper mines in the state, grandmother to children who would grow up knowing that love means respect, and a woman who'd finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued. The transformation was complete, and it had happened exactly as it should have, quietly, with dignity, and entirely on my own terms. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.